The call came at 6 p.m. sharp on May 29th, 2025. Unknown number. I almost let it ring through. Bill collectors had my number and I couldn't afford to pay them yet. But something made me pick up. Marcus Reed? The voice was gravelly, professional. Speaking. We need a night security guard. Remote facility near Fairbanks. $5,000 a week, cash. You interested? I sat up straighter in my cramped San Diego apartment. The eviction notice on my coffee table suddenly felt less threatening. $5,000 would cover rent, food, and maybe start chipping away at the debt that had been crushing me since discharge. What's the catch? Previous guard left unexpectedly. We need someone tonight. Your Marine record came recommended. Captain Marcus Reed, 38, discharged honorably after 8 years of service. What he didn't mention was the guilt that followed me home from Afghanistan, the way Daniels's voice still echoed in my dreams, the way I'd ignored his warning about the IED that took his life in 2017. Some nights, I still heard him calling my name, begging me to listen. What kind of facility? Atmospheric research, Site Delta 9. Classified, but standard security work. Can you be here by 7? I'll take it. Good. Charter flight leaves Seattle in 3 hours. Drive north on the Stees Highway 20 miles past Fairbanks. Look for the unmarked access road at mile marker 47. Someone will meet you. The line went dead. I packed light, tactical gear, my personal Glock 19, and enough clothes for a week. The charter flight to Fairbanks was smooth, but the drive to Site Delta 9 tested my nerves. Polar twilight painted the taiga in shades of blue and silver, the boreal pines casting long shadows across the gravel road. 20 miles of nothing but forest and the occasional glimpse of distant mountains. The air through my rental car's vents carried the sharp bite of pine and something else. Ozone, like the smell before a thunderstorm. Mile marker 47 appeared in my headlights. The access road was barely visible, 2 tire tracks cutting through the trees. I followed it for another mile until I reached a chain-link fence topped with razor wire. Beyond it, a concrete structure squatted among the pines like a military bunker. The gate buzzed open as I approached. Security cameras tracked my rental car as I drove to a small parking area. The facility looked bigger up close. 3 stories of reinforced concrete with a camouflaged roof that blended into the tree line. No windows on the ground level. Just a single steel door marked with biometric scanners and warning signs I couldn't read from this distance. A man emerged from the building as I parked. Stocky, 50s, with the weathered look of someone who'd spent years in harsh climates. His eyes had that darting quality I'd seen in soldiers who'd been in the field too long, always watching, always expecting trouble. Reed? I'm Klein, facility supervisor. His handshake was firm but brief. He led me through the steel door into a decontamination chamber. Pine disinfectant stung my nose, sharp and medicinal. The air recyclers hummed overhead as we waited for the inner door to unlock. Red lights blinked in sequence, scanning us with invisible beams. Atmospheric research? I asked. His eyes flicked away. Specialized equipment, sensitive to contamination. The inner door opened with a pneumatic hiss, revealing a corridor lined with polished steel that gleamed like ice. Our footsteps echoed as Klein led me deeper into the facility. The walls reflected our movement in distorted fragments, my face stretched wide, his compressed into shadow. The steel felt cold even through the recycled air, and frost had formed in the corners where the ventilation couldn't reach. 2 sublevels, he said, handing me a laminated card. Sublevel 1 has offices, break room, security hub. Sublevel 2 houses the main equipment. Your post is the security hub on sublevel 1. I glanced at the card. 5 rules, numbered and bold. 1. Cover all mirrors in sublevel 2 after 11, PM 2. Do not enter Lab 4 between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. 3. If you hear static, activate the Rift Stabilizer immediately 4. Carry the frequency jammer at all times 5. Do not engage with reflections that speak interesting rules for atmospheric research. Klein's jaw tightened. His eyes slid to a mirror mounted on the corridor wall, then away. "Break them. You're gone. No exceptions." We passed a door marked Lab 4 Dimensional Calibration. Through the reinforced glass window, I glimpsed sophisticated equipment that definitely wasn't for studying weather patterns. A particle accelerator, maybe. The kind of hardware that cost millions and required clearance levels I didn't have. The hum from inside vibrated through the walls like a mechanical heartbeat, steady and unnerving. How long has this facility been operational? 5 years, low profile. We like it that way. The break room was sparse. A cot with military-issue blankets, a metal table scarred with coffee rings, a coffee maker with a cracked ceramic mug beside it. The coffee smelled like it had been brewing for hours, stale and bitter. I tested it. Tasted like ash mixed with burnt plastic. The air here carried a different scent. Ozone, sharp and electric, mixing with the lingering pine disinfectant. It made my skin prickle. "Previous guard," I said. "What happened to him?" Klein's eyes darted to the break room mirror again, then away. His reflection looked wrong somehow. Too pale, too tense. Gone. That's all that matters. He showed me to the security hub, a room filled with monitors displaying feeds from throughout the facility. The air here was thick with ozone, making my teeth ache. Banks of equipment hummed against one wall, labeled with terms I didn't recognize. Rift stabilizer, frequency modulator, dimensional anchor. Each device had warning labels in multiple languages, most of which I couldn't read. "Your gear." He handed me a tactical vest and a small device that looked like a modified radio. "Frequency jammer. Keep it on you always. The button activates it if you need to disrupt, interference." I strapped on the vest, holstered my Glock, and clipped the jammer to my belt. The weight felt familiar, reassuring. Whatever this place really was, I'd handled worse situations in Afghanistan. At least, I hoped I had. The jammer was warm to the touch, humming faintly against my hip. "Shift starts at 10 p.m., Klein said. "Radio check every hour. Any problems? Call me first." He paused at the door, hand on the frame. "And read?" "The rules aren't suggestions. They're survival instructions." Alone in the security hub, I studied the facility map. Sublevel 1 was straightforward. Offices, storage, the hub. Sublevel 2 showed Lab 4 and something called Cell 3 Containment. The accelerator's hum vibrated through the walls, a constant presence that made my teeth ache and my vision blur slightly at the edges. I found a locked cabinet labeled Rift Protocols, not mentioned in my briefing. I made a mental note to ask Klein about it later, though something told me he wouldn't be forthcoming. The lock looked military grade, the kind that required special clearance. At 9 p.m., I tested the frequency jammer. It buzzed sharply in my palm, the sound cutting through the ambient hum like a blade through silk. The monitors flickered when I activated it, static crawling across the screens for a moment before clearing. One screen showed Lab 4's interior, banks of equipment surrounding a central chamber that pulsed with soft blue light, hypnotic and unsettling. In the corner of the Lab 4 feed, a mirror reflected the room. For just a moment, I saw a shadow that didn't match anything in the frame. Tall, angular, moving wrong. I blinked. Gone. Klein's voice crackled over the radio. "Read. Radio check. Read here. All clear. Good. Remember the rules." His voice carried tension I couldn't place, like he expected something to go wrong. Like he knew something would. At 10 p.m. sharp, my shift began. I left the security hub and started my first patrol of Sublevel 1. The corridors were lit by fluorescent strips that buzzed like angry insects. My boots echoed on the steel flooring, the sound bouncing off walls that reflected my image in fragments. Each reflection seemed slightly off, my eyes too wide, my smile too forced. The facility felt wrong. Too cold, too quiet. The kind of wrongness that made my skin crawl. The same feeling I'd had in Afghanistan before ambushes. The air tasted metallic, and every reflection seemed to watch me with eyes that weren't quite right. Frost gathered in corners where the heating couldn't reach, and my breath misted despite the climate control. I passed the break room again, noting how the cracked mug sat exactly where Klein had left it. The coffee had stopped brewing, but the smell lingered, bitter and burnt. In the mirror above the sink, my reflection looked tired, older than my 38 years. The guilt of Daniel's death had aged me, carved lines around my eyes that hadn't been there before Afghanistan. Back in the security hub, I settled into the chair and watched the monitors. Each feed showed empty corridors, humming equipment, and that pulsing blue light in Lab 4. Everything normal. Everything except the feeling that something was watching me through the cameras, studying my movements. I checked my watch. 10:30 p.m. Still had 7.5 hours until dawn. The night air outside the facility was crisp, the kind that bit at exposed skin and made every breath feel sharp and alive. The taiga stretched endlessly, a sea of dark green punctuated by the skeletal silhouettes of boreal pines swaying in the cold wind. The sky was a deep indigo, the polar twilight casting long, eerie shadows that seemed to move just beyond the edge of vision. Inside, the fluorescent lights flickered intermittently, their buzzing a constant reminder of the facility's age and the secrets it held. The steel walls gleamed under the harsh lighting, cold and unyielding, reflecting every movement with a distorted clarity that made me uneasy. I ran my fingers over the laminated rule card again, the edges worn from use. Each rule felt like a lifeline, a fragile barrier between order and chaos. The words, "Do not engage with reflections that speak," sent a chill down my spine. What kind of place required such a rule? I thought about Daniel's again, the way his eyes had looked the last time I saw him. Haunted, desperate. The mission in Afghanistan had gone sideways, and I had ignored his warning. That mistake had cost him his life. The guilt was a weight I carried every day, heavier than any gear or weapon. The facility's silence was oppressive. Even the hum of the accelerator felt like a warning, a reminder that something was lurking beneath the surface. I checked my watch again. 10:45 p.m. The night was still young, but the shadows seemed to grow longer with every passing minute. I moved through the corridors with practiced caution, my boots echoing on the steel floors. The mirrors caught my eye again, their surfaces shimmering with an unnatural gleam. I resisted the urge to look too long, remembering the rules. The locked cabinet labeled Rift Protocols nagged at me. What kind of research required such secrecy, and why had the previous guard vanished without a trace? I found myself drawn to the break room mirror despite the warnings. My reflection looked back tired and worn, the lines of stress etched deep into my face. I clenched my fists, reminding myself that this job was just a means to an end. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, a mournful sound that echoed through the facility's walls. The taiga was alive with unseen creatures, their calls distant but persistent. I tested the frequency jammer again, the sharp buzz cutting through the silence. The monitors flickered, and for a moment I thought I saw movement in the shadows beyond the camera's reach. The radio crackled to life. "Read, radio check. Read here, all clear. Good, remember the rules." Klein's voice was steady but carried an edge of urgency. I wondered what he wasn't telling me. I settled back into the chair, the weight of the night pressing down. The facility was a cage, and I was the lone sentinel. The fluorescent lights flickered again, casting long shadows that danced on the steel walls. The cold air seeped into my bones, making me pull my jacket tighter. The hum of the accelerator was a constant reminder that this place was alive, breathing in its own strange way. I thought about the rules again, each one a thread holding the fabric of this night together. Cover the mirrors, avoid Lab 4 during the forbidden hours, activate the stabilizer if static rose, carry the jammer, ignore the reflections that spoke. What kind of nightmare was I stepping into? The silence was broken by the distant clang of metal, a door somewhere, or maybe a dropped tool. My heart jumped, muscles tensing. I reminded myself to breathe, to stay calm. Marine training kicked in, steadying my nerves. I checked the monitors again. The corridors were empty, the blue glow of Lab 4 pulsing softly. But in the corner of my eye, a flicker, a shadow moving against the grain of reality. I shook my head, trying to dispel the creeping dread. This was just a job, a paycheck, a chance to start over. But as the minutes ticked by, the feeling grew, a presence lurking just beyond the edge of sight, waiting for me to slip. I glanced at the clock. 11 p.m. Time to cover the mirrors in sub-level 2. The hours stretched on, each one heavier than the last. The fluorescent lights flickered intermittently, casting eerie shadows that seemed to creep along the walls. The cold air was a constant presence, seeping into every corner, chilling me to the bone. I found myself staring at the monitors, the blue glow of Lab 4's core, pulsing like a heartbeat. The hum of the accelerator was a low, steady drone, vibrating through the floor and into my chest. My thoughts drifted to Daniel's again. The guilt was a shadow that clung to me, a constant reminder of failure. I wondered if he was out there somewhere, trapped in some reflection, trying to warn me. The rules echoed in my mind, a mantra to keep me grounded. Cover the mirrors. Avoid Lab 4 during the forbidden hours. Activate the stabilizer if static rose. Carry the jammer. Ignore the reflections that spoke. I checked the clock. Midnight. Halfway through the shift. The silence was broken by a faint crackle on the radio. Static, sharp, and sudden. My hand moved instinctively to the frequency jammer, pressing the button. The noise faded, replaced by an uneasy quiet. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. The facility was a cage, and I was its lone sentinel. The monitors flickered again. In the corner of the Lab 4 feed, my reflection blinked. I didn't. The mirrors didn't lie, but they didn't tell the truth either. I stared at the Lab 4 monitor, my reflection frozen in the corner mirror. The image looked back with eyes that held too much knowledge, a slight smile that wasn't mine. I blinked hard, rubbing my eyes. When I looked again, the reflection was normal. Tired, stressed, but undeniably me. Static crackled from the corridor speakers, sharp, like snapping twigs. Rule 3 kicked in before conscious thought. My hand hit the Rift stabilizer button. The device hummed to life, a deep thrumming that vibrated through the floor. The static faded, replaced by an oppressive silence that felt heavier than the noise. I checked my watch. 10:35 p.m. Still early in the shift, but the wrongness was escalating. The facility's hum had changed pitch, becoming more urgent, more alive. I left the security hub for my first patrol of sub-level 2. The elevator descended with mechanical precision, each floor marked by a soft chime. The doors opened to reveal a corridor identical to sub-level 1, but colder. Frost gathered in the corners despite the climate control. My breath misted in small puffs. The mirrors here were my priority. Rule 1. Cover all mirrors in sub-level 2 after 11 p.m. I was early, but something told me not to wait. I pulled cloth from my tactical pack and approached the first mirror mounted near the elevator. In its surface, I saw myself, but also something else. A tall, translucent figure stood behind me, limbs bending at impossible angles. Its skin shimmered like oil on water, and when it moved, reality seemed to bend around it. I spun around. Nothing there. Back to the mirror. Empty except for my reflection. I draped the cloth over the glass, pulse hammering against my ribs. The fabric felt heavy in my hands, weighted with significance I couldn't understand. As I secured it, I heard something, a whisper, so faint it might have been the ventilation system. But it sounded like my name. Moving down the corridor, I covered 3 more mirrors. Each one showed glimpses of the translucent figure before going dark under cloth. By the time I reached Lab 4's entrance, my hands were shaking. Through the reinforced window, the particle accelerator pulsed with that hypnotic blue light. Banks of equipment surrounded the central chamber, their displays showing readings I couldn't interpret. One screen caught my attention. Non-Euclidean transit log. The words felt wrong in my mind, like they belonged to a language humans weren't meant to speak. Below them, coordinates scrolled past, not latitude and longitude, but something else entirely. Dimensional addresses, maybe. I tried the door. Locked, as expected. Rule 2 didn't apply yet. It was only 10:45 p.m., but something told me to stay away regardless. Back in the security hub, I reviewed the monitors more carefully. Most showed empty corridors and humming equipment, but Lab 4's feed displayed that same screen I'd seen through the window. As I watched, the display changed. A face appeared in the reflection of Lab 4's central mirror, Daniels's face. His eyes were hollow, sunken like graves. His mouth moved, forming words I couldn't hear through the monitor's speakers. But I knew what he was saying, the same thing he'd said in Afghanistan before the IED took him. "Captain, don't go that way. Something's wrong." I'd ignored him then, got him killed for it. The image flickered and vanished. I was alone again with the hum of machinery and the taste of ozone in the air. My radio crackled. "Read. Radio check. Read here, covering mirrors as required." "Good. Any anomalies?" I almost mentioned Daniel's face, but something held me back. "All quiet, sir." "Keep it that way." Klein's voice carried that same tension, like he was waiting for bad news. I made a mental note to ask him about the previous guard. What had really happened? At 11 p.m. exactly, I started another patrol. The covered mirrors felt like watchful eyes, their cloth drapes rippling in air currents that shouldn't exist underground. I moved carefully, boots echoing on steel floors that reflected the overhead lights in broken patterns. A steel wall panel caught my attention. Its surface was polished enough to show reflections, and in it I saw Klein walking behind me. But when I turned, the corridor was empty. Back to the reflection. Klein was still there, but something was wrong with his face. His jaw stretched too far, teeth glinting like broken glass. His eyes were black holes that seemed to pull light into them. I gripped the frequency jammer, its familiar weight steadying my nerves. The device hummed against my hip, a reminder that I had some defense against whatever this was. The reflected Klein smiled wider, jaw unhinging like a snake's. I walked away, following Marine protocols. Don't engage unknown hostiles without clear orders. Rule 5 supported this decision. Don't engage with reflections that speak. Even if this one hadn't spoken yet, it was clearly not normal. But as I moved down the corridor, I heard footsteps behind me, measured, deliberate, matching my pace. I stopped. The footsteps stopped. I started walking. They resumed. In a bathroom mirror I'd missed earlier, my reflection looked wrong. Aged, wrinkles carved deep lines across my face, and my eyes had sunk into hollow sockets. Gray hair sprouted from my scalp in wild patches. My hands were gnarled with arthritis. I blinked. The reflection reset to normal, tired but recognizably me. My hands shook as I covered this mirror too. Whatever was happening here went beyond atmospheric research. This was something else entirely, something that played with reality itself. At 11:30 p.m., I found a memo in a lab drawer while searching for more cloth. The paper was yellowed, stamped with classifications I didn't recognize. Breach Report, June 2024. Subject, SCP-3056. Classification, Hostile Mirror Entity. Status, contained following multiple guard fatalities. Notes, entity mimics personnel, appears only in reflective surfaces. Recommend enhanced containment protocols. Static surged through the facility's speakers as I read. Not the sharp crackling from before, but a low, constant hiss like radio static, mixed with whispers. I activated the Rift stabilizer again, but the noise persisted. Then, I heard it clearly. "Captain." Help me." Daniels's voice, muffled but unmistakable, coming from behind a covered mirror. My chest tightened. The guilt I'd carried for years crashed over me like a wave. In Afghanistan, I'd been the one giving orders. I'd been responsible for my squad's safety, and I'd failed. "Captain, please. I'm trapped." The voice was desperate, pleading. Everything in me wanted to pull away that cloth, to see if somehow Daniels was really there, really alive. But Rule 5 held me back. Don't engage with reflections that speak. I walked away, each step feeling like betrayal. Behind me, Daniel's voice faded to a whisper, then silence. My radio crackled. "Read, report." "Sir, I found some documentation about previous incidents. SCP-3056. A pause. Too long. Old nonsense. Previous admin had active imaginations. Disregard. But Klein's voice was too quick, too dismissive. He knew exactly what I was talking about. Back in the security hub, I searched more thoroughly. Hidden in a drawer behind maintenance logs, I found another document. Guard Fatality Reports, 2024. 6 names. 6 guards who died during night shifts, all from rift instability exposure. The last entry was dated 2 weeks ago. The guard I'd replaced. At 11:55 p.m., I made another patrol round. Most mirrors stayed properly covered, but as I passed one near cell 3, I saw movement beneath the cloth. The fabric bulged outward as if something was pressing against the glass from inside. I lifted the edge carefully. Daniel's reflection stood in the mirror, wearing his old desert fatigues. He snapped to attention and saluted me with military precision, but the mirror was supposed to show the empty corridor behind me. I dropped the cloth and backed away. Behind the covered mirror, claws scraped against glass, slow, deliberate, like fingernails on a chalkboard. My nerve broke. I ran for the security hub, locked the door, and tried to catch my breath. My hands were shaking, sweat cold on my forehead despite the facility's chill. The monitors showed empty corridors, normal equipment readings. Everything looked fine. But in Lab 4's corner mirror, despite the cloth covering I'd placed over it hours ago, Daniel's reflection stood watching. His mouth moved, forming my name over and over. Static was growing louder. It knew my name. The static drowned the security hub's radio like a swarm of wasps, sharp and relentless. I gripped the frequency jammer tighter, its familiar hum a small comfort against the growing chaos. The monitors flickered, their screens crawling with interference that made my eyes water and my teeth ache. The ozone smell had intensified, thick enough to taste. Metallic and wrong. 12:15 a.m. The night was deep, and the facility felt alive with something malevolent. In Lab 4's monitor, the stalker materialized behind the covered mirror, a tall, translucent figure with limbs that bent at impossible angles. Its skin shimmered like oil on water, catching the blue glow of the accelerator's core. When it moved, reality seemed to warp around it, the air bending like heat waves. For a moment, our eyes met through the screen, its gaze ancient, hungry, and utterly alien. Then it vanished. The lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in hellish red. The static grew louder, filling the hub with noise like breaking glass mixed with whispers in languages I didn't recognize. I grabbed my flashlight and tactical vest, checking my Glock's magazine by muscle memory. 15 rounds. Not much against something that lived in reflections, but the weight was comforting. A mirror in the corridor outside flickered to life despite being covered. The cloth fell away as if pushed by invisible hands. The stalker stood there, claws glinting like polished steel. Its face was wrong, features shifting between Daniel's and something else, eyes too wide, mouth stretching into an impossible grin that showed too many teeth. I sprinted from the hub, boots pounding on steel floors that echoed like gunshots. The creature teleported from mirror to mirror, following me through the fractured reflections. My flashlight beam sliced through the darkness, catching glimpses of its form as it stalked me through the facility's reflective surfaces. now in a door's polished handle, now in the chrome fixtures of the break room. "Captain," it called in Daniel's voice, perfect in every inflection, "don't leave me behind again." The words hit like a punch to the gut. In Afghanistan, I'd made the call to advance despite Daniel's warnings about the IED. That decision had cost him his life, and the guilt had followed me home like a shadow. Every night for 8 years, I'd heard his voice in my dreams, asking why I hadn't listened. I ducked into a stairwell, avoiding the polished steel handrails that could serve as mirrors. The stalker's voice echoed from above, now mimicking my own. "Stand down, Captain." That's an order. The sound of my own voice giving commands I'd never spoken sent ice through my veins, but I wasn't about to surrender to my own guilt made manifest. The stairwell was darker than the corridors, my flashlight creating a narrow cone of white in the red emergency glow. Frost had formed on the metal steps, making each footfall treacherous. My breath misted in the cold air, and somewhere in the walls I could hear the accelerator's hum growing more irregular. At 1 a.m., I found the armory on sublevel 1. The door was marked, "Authorized personnel only," but my keycard worked with a soft beep. Inside, the room was cold and sterile, filled with equipment that wasn't mentioned in the rules, but made logical sense for a facility like this. UV lights hung from hooks on the wall, industrial strength, the kind used for decontamination. They were heavy, built for extended use, with thick power cables and reinforced housings. Heavy-duty gloves sat in neat rows, along with emergency respirators and hazmat suits. This wasn't standard security equipment. This was for containing something dangerous. A logbook sat open on a metal table, its pages stained with sweat and what looked like tears. The entries detailed rift instability incidents and guard fatalities going back 3 years. Names, dates, causes of death, all clinical and sanitized. The previous guard's name was there, the one I'd replaced. Cause of death: dimensional exposure, acute psychological trauma. 6 guards total, all dead, all during night shifts. I was number 7. I grabbed 2 UV lights and a coil of power cable, my marine training kicking in. Plan the mission, gather intelligence, secure equipment, execute with precision. The lights were heavier than expected, but I'd carried worse in Afghanistan. If this thing was some kind of interdimensional entity, maybe ultraviolet radiation would affect it. Worth a try. Daniel's voice echoed through the ventilation system, reciting coordinates from our final mission, numbers burned into my memory forever. Grid reference 34 South DB 1234567890, IED suspected, recommend alternate route. The same warning I'd ignored 8 years ago, the same coordinates where he'd died because I thought I knew better. My hands shook as I rigged the first UV light to an emergency power outlet near the armory door. The connection was solid. Marine Corps had taught me basic electrical work. The harsh glow cut through the red emergency lighting, creating stark shadows that seemed to move on their own. When I activated it, the air itself seemed to hiss, and I caught a glimpse of something retreating from the light's reach. At 1:30 a.m., I ventured back to sub-level 2. My heart pounded against my ribs as I moved through corridors lined with covered mirrors. The cloth drapes moved in air currents that shouldn't exist underground, and I could swear I heard whispers from behind them. The UV light in my hand buzzed softly, its weight reassuring. The facility felt different now, more oppressive, like the walls were closing in. The emergency lighting cast everything in blood-red shadows, and the accelerator's hum had become erratic, sometimes stopping entirely before resuming with increased intensity. A steel panel near Lab 4 caught my attention, polished enough to show reflections. In its surface, the stalker appeared, its face a grotesque combination of Daniel's and something else entirely. Eyes too wide, skin translucent like wax, limbs that sprouted and twisted like broken tree branches. When it spoke, its voice was a perfect mimicry of Daniel's. "You got me killed, Marcus. You and your pride." I activated the frequency jammer according to Rule 4. The device buzzed sharply, and the stalker's image flickered like a bad television signal. For a moment, it looked directly at me, mouth opening in a silent scream that revealed rows of needle-sharp teeth. Then it vanished. But I could still hear claws scraping against metal somewhere in the walls, like fingernails on a chalkboard amplified 100 times. Through Lab 4's reinforced window, I spotted a console I'd missed earlier. It was labeled Rift Anchor, and its display pulsed with the same blue light as the particle accelerator. The readouts showed dimensional coordinates, not latitude and longitude, but something far more complex. Coordinates for locations that existed between spaces, in the gaps between reality. The accelerator wasn't for atmospheric research. It was a doorway, opening paths to somewhere else, and something had come through. The stalker's mimicry was getting better, more sophisticated. When it spoke now, it used my exact voice, my inflection, my marine training. Security Protocol 77 Alpha. All personnel report to stations immediately. It was learning from me, copying not just my appearance but my mannerisms, my authority, my memories. Soon it might be able to fool others into thinking it was me. The thought of this thing wearing my face, using my voice to hurt innocent people, made my jaw clench. I rigged the second UV light in the corridor outside Lab 4, its cable snaking along the floor to another emergency outlet. The installation took precious minutes, but I needed every advantage I could get. My hands worked automatically, muscle memory from countless equipment setups in the field. The facility's hum had changed again, becoming more urgent, more alive. Through the walls, I could hear the accelerator's rhythm shifting, like a heartbeat under stress. Whatever experiment was running here, it was becoming increasingly unstable. The air itself felt charged, making my skin prickle and my hair stand on end. My radio crackled with static, then cleared long enough for a message. Read, report your status. Security hub compromised, I replied, moving to secondary position. Understood. Maintain protocols. Klein's voice was tight with tension, but something about it felt wrong. The inflection was perfect, but there was an undertone I couldn't place, like someone reading from a script. He knew what was happening, had probably seen it before with other guards. The question was whether he was trying to contain the situation or just cover it up. At 1:45 a.m., I heard footsteps in the corridor behind me. Measured, deliberate, matching my pace exactly. The sound of combat boots on steel, the same rhythm I'd learned to march to in basic training. When I stopped, they stopped. When I moved, they followed. I spun around, UV light raised like a weapon. The corridor was empty, but in a steel door's polished surface, I saw myself walking, except the reflection was wrong. My doppelganger's eyes were black holes that seemed to pull light into them, and its smile stretched too wide, revealing teeth like broken glass. "Hello, Marcus," it said in my voice, perfect in every detail. "Time to face what you've done." This time, I didn't run. I pointed the UV light directly at the reflection and activated it. The harsh glow flooded the polished surface, and the false Marcus screamed. A sound like metal tearing and static feedback combined. The air around the light shimmered, and I caught the scent of ozone mixed with something organic and rotten. The reflection shattered into fragments, each piece showing a different distorted image of my face. Older, younger, scarred, peaceful, all wrong in their own way. Then the door went dark, its surface suddenly matte and unreflective. I was learning to fight back. The claws scraping in the walls grew louder, more insistent. Whatever this thing was, it was getting agitated. Good. Angry predators made mistakes, and I'd survived 8 years of combat by exploiting enemy mistakes. I checked my watch, 1:50 a.m. Still had over 2 hours until dawn, and Rule 2 meant I couldn't enter Lab 4 between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. But maybe I didn't need to go inside. Maybe I could find another way to disrupt whatever was anchoring this entity to our reality. The stalker appeared in another reflection, this time mimicking Klein perfectly. His weathered face, his nervous eye movements, even his gruff voice. "Read, return to your post immediately. That's a direct order." But I'd seen Klein's reflection distorted earlier, jaw unhinged like a snake's. The real Klein might already be compromised, or worse. The thought that this thing might have gotten to him first made my stomach turn. I activated the jammer again, and the false Klein flickered out of existence like a television being turned off. But I could still hear it moving through the facility's reflective surfaces, hunting me with patient, predatory intelligence. Every mirror, every polished surface was a potential ambush point. The UV lights hummed in their improvised mounts, casting harsh shadows that danced on the steel walls. The emergency lighting bathed everything in red, making the facility look like the inside of a beating heart. The combination of red and ultraviolet created an otherworldly atmosphere that made everything feel unreal. I was alone with a monster that wore familiar faces, trapped in a maze of mirrors and steel. But I was still breathing, still fighting, still thinking tactically. My Marine training had prepared me for asymmetric warfare, and this was just another battlefield, and I had a plan forming. The creature had shown weaknesses. UV light disrupted it, the frequency jammer interfered with its manifestations, and it seemed bound to reflective surfaces. If I could find a way to trap it, contain it, maybe I could survive until dawn. Cell 3 was labeled Containment on the facility map. Maybe it was time to see what it was designed to contain. The stalker's voice echoed through the vents again, now cycling through different people I'd known. My drill sergeant, my squad mates, my mother. Each voice perfect, each one designed to break my concentration, to make me doubt myself. But I'd been broken before in Afghanistan, when Daniels died. I'd put myself back together once. I could do it again. The hunt was far from over, but for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like the predator instead of the prey. Some doors I had to shut myself. 2 a.m. The digital clock in the security hub glowed red, numbers flickering as if uncertain of their own existence. I stared at it, the weight of the rules pressing down on me like a physical force. Rule 2. Do not enter Lab 4 between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. But the stalker was no longer content to haunt the mirrors. It was hunting me, learning, adapting with predatory intelligence. The rules were meant to keep me alive, but tonight, survival meant breaking them. The facility's hum had changed again, becoming erratic and urgent. The accelerator pulsed like a dying star, its rhythm stuttering and catching. Through the walls, I could hear metal groaning under stress, as if the building itself was struggling to contain whatever forces churned within Lab 4. I checked my gear with practiced efficiency. Glock loaded with 15 rounds, frequency jammer humming against my hip, UV lights slung over my shoulder, tactical vest snug against my chest. My hands trembled, not from fear but from adrenaline coursing through my veins like liquid fire. The air in the hub was thick with ozone, the tang of burnt electronics mixing with stale coffee and something else, something organic and wrong. The monitors flickered constantly now, static crawling across the screens like digital insects. The stalker's last appearance had left more than just a smear of frost on the glass. The air itself felt charged, electric, as if reality was wearing thin. Every shadow seemed to move independently. Every reflection held potential menace. I moved through the corridor toward Lab 4, boots echoing on steel that gleamed like ice under the emergency lighting. The red glow painted everything in shades of blood and shadow, creating a hellscape of distorted geometry. The hum of the accelerator was louder here, a pulsing heartbeat that seemed to sync with my own, drawing me forward like a siren call. The mirrors in Sublevel 2 were all covered, but every reflective surface remained a potential threat. I kept my eyes fixed straight ahead, avoiding the polished steel walls, the chrome handles, the glass of the fire extinguisher cases. The stalker could manifest anywhere, waiting for a moment's carelessness to strike. At 2:15 a.m., I reached the door to Lab 4. My keycard trembled in my hand as I swiped it through the reader. The lock disengaged with a heavy thunk that echoed down the corridor, and the pneumatic hiss of the door opening was deafening in the oppressive silence. The sound felt like a violation, like I was opening something that should remain sealed. Inside, the accelerator core pulsed with that hypnotic blue light, but now it stuttered and flared like a malfunctioning strobe. The illumination cast dancing shadows that seemed to move independently of their sources. Banks of equipment surrounded the central chamber, their displays showing readings that spiked and plummeted in chaotic patterns. Warning lights blinked frantically, and the air was so cold my breath misted in thick puffs. Frost covered every surface, forming delicate crystalline patterns that shouldn't exist in a climate-controlled facility. The temperature had dropped at least 20 degrees since my last visit. My tactical vest felt inadequate against the penetrating cold that seemed to seep into my bones. The accelerator's hum was a constant presence, a mechanical heartbeat that seemed to echo through my chest cavity. But beneath it, I heard something else. Whispers. So faint they might have been the ventilation system, but they formed words in languages I didn't recognize. I moved carefully through the lab, every sense hyper-alert. The mirrored panel I'd spotted earlier was still propped against the far wall, but now it seemed to pulse with its own inner light. Its surface was unnervingly reflective, showing not just my approach, but somehow more than should be visible. In its depths, I caught glimpses of movement that didn't correspond to anything in the room. The stalker appeared suddenly behind me, teleporting from whatever dimensional space it inhabited. Claws like polished steel grazed my tactical vest, leaving shallow scratches in the Kevlar. The touch was ice cold, burning through the fabric like frozen fire. I spun around, activating the frequency jammer in the same motion. The device buzzed sharply, its electromagnetic field disrupting whatever forces allowed the creature to manifest. The stalker recoiled with a sound like static feedback mixed with a human scream, its form distorting and flickering before retreating into the shadows between the equipment banks. My heart hammered against my ribs as I grabbed the mirrored panel. It was heavier than expected, the weight substantial and cold. The surface felt wrong against my gloves, too smooth, too perfect, like touching liquid mercury that had been frozen solid. In its reflection, I saw myself, but also something else lurking just beyond the edge of perception. An idea had been forming since I'd discovered the UV lights in the armory. If this creature was interdimensional, if it existed primarily in reflective surfaces, then maybe I could trap it. Use its own hunting ground against it. I hauled the mirror toward Cell 3, the containment corridor I'd noted on the facility map. The panel scraped against the floor, the sound echoing through the empty halls like fingernails on glass. Each step felt measured, deliberate, as if I was walking toward either salvation or doom. Cell 3's corridor was different from the rest of the facility. The walls were lined with some kind of absorptive material that deadened sound and seemed to swallow light. The door at the end was massive, reinforced steel with multiple locking mechanisms and a small observation window set high in the frame. Whatever this cell was designed to contain, it wasn't human. I rigged the mirrored panel with the UV lights I'd scavenged from the armory, securing them with duct tape and zip ties from my tactical pack. The installation was crude, but functional. Military efficiency over aesthetics. The lights hummed to life when I connected them to a portable battery pack, casting harsh ultraviolet rays that made my skin tingle and the air shimmer. At 2:45 a.m., I set the frequency jammer on a timer, syncing it with the UV lights for maximum effect. The plan was elegant in its simplicity: lure the stalker into the corridor using the mirror as bait, then trap it with the combined UV bombardment and electromagnetic interference. Once it was solidified and contained, I could seal it behind the reinforced door. I positioned myself in the shadows outside the corridor, Glock drawn and ready. My breath came slow and steady, controlled by years of military training. The corridor was silent except for the electrical hum of the UV lights and the distant, irregular thrum of the accelerator. The facility felt like it was holding its breath, waiting. My mind drifted involuntarily to Daniels, to the last time I'd seen him alive in that Afghan valley. His warning about the IED, my stubborn insistence on following the planned route, the explosion that had torn him apart while I watched helplessly. The guilt was a familiar weight, heavier than any equipment I'd ever carried. The stalker appeared at exactly 3 a.m., manifesting in the rigged mirror with a sound like breaking glass. It wore Daniel's face perfectly, every detail correct except for the eyes, which held an alien intelligence that had never been human. Its limbs twitched and bent at impossible angles, and when it spoke, the voice was Daniel's exact intonation. "Captain, help me. Don't leave me behind again." I didn't answer. Rule 5 echoed in my mind. Do not engage with reflections that speak. Instead, I focused on its claws, on the way its translucent form flickered in the UV light. The creature was less solid here, more vulnerable. To complete the trap, I needed one more element. I drew my Glock and fired 3 rounds into a decoy mirror I'd positioned down the corridor. The gunshots were deafening in the enclosed space, the muzzle flashes strobing like lightning. Glass exploded in a cascade of glittering fragments, the crash echoing through the facility like a dinner bell. The stalker took the bait immediately, lunging for the sound with predatory instinct. As it moved toward the rigged panel, the UV lights flared to maximum intensity. The harsh radiation solidified its form, transforming the translucent specter into something almost physical. Pale flesh that seemed to absorb light, claws like broken glass that scraped sparks from the steel walls. The frequency jammer activated on cue, its electromagnetic pulse sealing whatever dimensional rift allowed the creature to phase between realities. Cut off from its escape route, the stalker was trapped in our dimension, subject to our physical laws. I slammed Cell 3's door shut with all my strength, the reinforced steel thudding closed with mechanical finality. Multiple locks engaged automatically, magnetic, mechanical, and electronic systems all securing simultaneously. Through the observation window, I watched the stalker claw desperately at the walls, its form flickering between menace and something almost pitiful. Back in the security hub at 3:30 a.m., adrenaline still coursing through my system, I searched the computer files more thoroughly. Hidden in a restricted directory, I found a video log labeled Subject 3056, Rift Transit Study, Classification Level 5. The footage was damning. It showed previous guards being systematically exposed to the entity, their reactions monitored and recorded, men and women dying in terror while scientists took notes. Klein and Dr. Voss appeared in multiple clips discussing containment protocols and the acceptable loss parameters for human test subjects. The truth was darker than I'd imagined. The facility wasn't just a research site, it was a laboratory, and the guards weren't employees. We were bait, live specimens being fed to an interdimensional predator in the name of science. The weight of this revelation pressed down on me like a physical force. The guilt over Daniels, the lies I'd been told, the danger that lurked in every reflection, it all crystallized into a cold, hard rage. These people had been using human beings as disposable test subjects, and I'd almost become the latest casualty. Through Cell 3's monitor, I watched the stalker slowly form my face in its translucent flesh. It pressed against the observation window silently, wearing my features like a mask. But its eyes remained alien, hungry, patient. It was contained, but not defeated. The facility's lights flickered as dawn approached, and somewhere in the walls, the accelerator continued its irregular rhythm. The night was ending, but this was far from over. The real test wasn't the monster. 4 a.m. I sat in the security hub, adrenaline still coursing through my veins like liquid fire. The facility had settled into an uneasy quiet, the accelerator's hum finally stabilizing to a steady rhythm. Through Cell 3's monitor, I watched the stalker prowling its containment, wearing my face like a mask. Its alien eyes pressed against the observation window, patient and hungry. The emergency lighting had dimmed to a soft red glow as dawn approached. Outside, the polar twilight was beginning to pale, the first hints of morning bleeding through the reinforced windows. The air still tasted of ozone and burnt electronics, but the oppressive weight of the night was lifting. I'd done it. Survived the test, contained the threat, broken the cycle that had killed 6 guards before me. But the victory felt hollow, tainted by the knowledge that I'd been manipulated from the beginning. The coffee in my cracked mug had gone cold hours ago, but I sipped it anyway, savoring the bitter taste that grounded me in reality. My tactical vest was scorched and scratched, evidence of my encounter with claws that existed between dimensions. The frequency jammer sat heavy on my belt, its weight a reminder of how close I'd come to joining the list of casualties. Every mirror in the facility remained covered, their cloth drapes rippling in air currents that shouldn't exist underground. The computer files I'd discovered painted a damning picture, video logs showing previous guards being systematically exposed to the entity, their reactions monitored and recorded like lab rats in a maze, men and women dying in terror while scientists took notes. The guards weren't employees, we were test subjects. Bait for an interdimensional predator in the name of research. At 4:30 a.m., I conducted a final patrol of Sub-Level 2. The corridors were quieter now, the facility's mechanical heartbeat steady and controlled. The covered mirrors no longer rippled with unseen movement, and the frost that had gathered in corners was beginning to melt. Whatever forces had been unleashed during the night were finally contained. Cell 3's door remained sealed, its multiple locking mechanisms engaged. Through the observation window, I could see the stalker testing the boundaries of its prison, pressing translucent fingers against walls that absorbed its touch. It had stopped mimicking my face, reverting to its natural form, if such a thing could be called natural. Limbs that bent at impossible angles, skin like oil on water, eyes that held the hunger of eternity. The UV lights I'd rigged in the corridor continued to hum, their harsh glow creating a barrier the creature couldn't cross. The frequency jammer had done its work, sealing whatever dimensional rift allowed the entity to phase between realities. For now, it was trapped in our dimension, subject to our physical laws. I thought about Daniels again, about the guilt that had driven me to take this job in the first place. The stalker had used his face, his voice, trying to break my resolve with memories of failure. But facing that mimicry had somehow freed me from the worst of the guilt. I couldn't save Daniels, couldn't undo the past, but I could prevent others from suffering the same fate. At 5 a.m., I returned to the security hub and began writing my report. The events of the night needed to be documented, not for the scientists who had orchestrated this nightmare, but for whoever might follow in my footsteps. Future guards deserved to know what they were really signing up for. The facility's air recycling system had cleared most of the ozone smell, replacing it with the sterile scent of filtered air and industrial disinfectant. The monitors displayed normal readings across all systems, contained anomaly in Cell 3, accelerator operating within safe parameters, no breaches detected. Just another successful night at Site Delta 9, 5:15 a.m. The security hub door opened without warning. Klein and Dr. Voss entered, their faces drawn with exhaustion, but their eyes sharp with purpose. The weight of the night pressed down on them as much as it did on me, but there was something else in their expressions, satisfaction, perhaps even pride. "Captain Reed," Voss began, his voice low and steady despite the early hour. "Congratulations. The stalker's escape was a controlled test, part of the Dimensional Containment Task Force's evaluation process. Your survival and successful containment prove you belong on our team." I stared at them, disbelief and anger twisting in my gut like a physical pain. The coffee mug slipped from my hands, shattering on the steel floor. "You used me as bait, used all those guards as test subjects." Klein's eyes flicked away, unable to meet my gaze. His weathered face looked older in the harsh lighting, carved with lines of guilt and resignation. "Previous guards lacked your specific skill set, Captain. We needed to verify your ability to handle rift anomalies under extreme stress." Voss nodded, his expression clinical and detached. "The research we conduct here is inherently risky. Dimensional instability could lead to global catastrophic breaches. We need operatives who can contain these threats when standard protocols fail." The room felt colder suddenly, the sterile air biting at my exposed skin. I clenched my fists, feeling the rage simmer beneath layers of exhaustion and adrenaline crash. "How many more have to die for your research?" "We do what we must to protect humanity," Voss replied, his tone suggesting this was a conversation he'd had many times before. But we're offering you a choice, Captain. Leave with a substantial payout and non-disclosure agreement, or join the Dimensional Containment Task Force with unlimited resources at your disposal. The offer hung in the air between us, heavy with implications. I could walk away, take their money, and try to forget this nightmare ever happened. Or I could stay and become part of whatever global network they represented. 5:45 a.m. I confronted them directly, my voice sharp with controlled anger. Those 6 guards who died, they weren't volunteers, were they? They thought they were taking security jobs, just like I did. Voss had the decency to look uncomfortable. The previous guards were less prepared for the psychological challenges involved. The rift anomalies require a specific mindset, particular training. Your military background, specifically your experience with loss and guilt, made you an ideal candidate. You've been monitoring my psychological profile since before you made the call, I realized. Daniels, my financial situation, my isolation. You knew exactly which buttons to push. Klein finally spoke, his voice rough with what might have been genuine regret. The facility's rift research has the potential to destabilize dimensional barriers on a planetary scale. If even one containment site fails catastrophically, billions could die. We need soldiers who understand sacrifice. I thought about the other sites Voss had mentioned, each one presumably staffed with carefully selected volunteers who had no idea what they were really guarding. How many more facilities like Delta 9 existed? How many more interdimensional threats were being studied and contained in secret? 6:30 a.m. My Marine oath echoed in my mind. Semper Fidelis, always faithful to the mission of protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. But this time, I would dictate the terms of my service. I'll join, I said finally, watching relief flicker across their faces. But I have conditions. Triple the pay, $15,000 a week. A private lodge in Fairbanks, fully equipped and off the grid. And I want access to real rift-disrupting equipment, not improvised UV lights and jury-rigged jammers. Voss nodded without hesitation, reaching into his jacket to produce a badge I'd never seen before. The metal was warm to the touch, etched with symbols that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. Welcome to the Dimensional Containment Task Force, Captain Reed. The badge felt heavy in my hand, weighted with responsibility and the promise of resources I could barely imagine. Whatever organization these men represented, it was far larger and more sophisticated than a single research facility in Alaska. There are other sites, Voss confirmed, as if reading my thoughts. Delta 9 is just one node in a global network. Some facilities study the anomalies, others contain them. A few serve as training grounds for operatives like yourself. 7 a.m. My shift officially ended as the first pale light of dawn began to filter through the facility's reinforced windows. I stepped outside into the crisp morning air, my breath misting in small puffs. The taiga stretched endlessly in all directions, a sea of dark green punctuated by snow-covered clearings. The cold was clean and sharp, a welcome relief after hours of recycled air and ozone. I could hear the forest awakening, the distant call of a hawk, the rustle of wind through pine branches, the crack of ice settling in the early morning chill. The facility behind me looked innocent enough, just another government installation hidden in the wilderness. I stayed, not for them, not for their shadowy organization or their grand mission to protect humanity. I stayed because somewhere out there, another desperate person might get a call offering easy money for a simple security job. I stayed to make sure the next guard would be prepared, would survive, would have a choice. The drive back to Fairbanks gave me time to think. The radio played soft, classic rock, a mundane soundtrack to an extraordinary night. Other drivers on the highway went about their normal lives, unaware of the threats contained in facilities like Delta 9. Maybe that was for the best. 1 week later, I settled into the lodge they'd provided, a modern cabin hidden among the trees outside Fairbanks, equipped with technology I was still learning to use. News reports had blamed the previous night's technical difficulties at an unnamed research facility on equipment malfunctions. No mention of missing guards or dimensional anomalies. Klein had vanished without a trace, transferred to another site, or perhaps removed from the program entirely. I suspected his guilt over the dead guards had finally caught up with him. New personnel had taken over Site Delta 9, people who looked at me with a mixture of respect and wariness. The lodge's main room had a large mirror mounted above the fireplace. For the first time in years, when I looked at my reflection, I didn't flinch. The face looking back was tired, scarred by experience, but steady. Daniel's ghost had finally been laid to rest, replaced by a new purpose. The Dimensional Containment Task Force was real, and so was the threat they fought. In the weeks that followed, I would learn about other sites, other anomalies, other brave men and women standing guard against things that should not exist. But that was tomorrow's mission. Tonight, I slept without nightmares for the first time in 8 years.